Communication Untangled with Sue Keogh. Untangling instructions.
When you walk into reception at Cambridge Design Partnership, you see lots of intriguing case studies on display, from heart catheters to smart pills to nasal swabs. As an innovation consultancy, it's critical that people can actually use the medical devices they develop, which is where clear instructions come in. Lucy Sheldon is a human factors engineer, focusing on good interaction design, helping people be at one with the technology they're using and not battling against it. Claire Beddoes heads up drug delivery, thinking about the needs of the patient and the medical teams and working closely with human factors to make sure that the drugs can be used safely, minimising risk in a very risk-averse sector. We'll talk about the importance of sound and visuals in helping people use devices properly and how they consider the emotional state of the end user. And we'll take a break in the middle for playtime, looking at Lego and how they make instructions that are not just functional, they're part of the fun too. Okay, so back to medical devices. I asked Lucy about the types of instructions she creates. Are they on paper? Are they on the packaging? Where do they exist?
The best instructions is no instructions at all.
Right.
So actually the primary thing that we design is the visual or audible messaging on the devices themselves, or the way that they feel in the hand, or the way that they look and the way that they're perceived, so that people can interpret how something is used. You know, the messaging from the devices themselves or the products themselves are instructions in themselves. But there is times when you can't, some things are so complicated that they can't be completely intuitive to somebody who's never seen a product or device like it before. So then we start to rely on other things. So the next level of instructions might be labeling. You might put a label on something that says, hold it this way, or the cap's at this end. And even in labeling, you can have pictures rather than words. And then I think maybe the tertiary thing would be the packaging of a product. So packaging can support the ability of people to go through the process of using a product. And then finally, I'd say an instruction leaflet. If you can't communicate through the other means how to use a product, then at that point you need some sort of instruction leaflet that guides as quickly and simply as possible the user through the process of using that product.
So you'd think that instructions would be step by step, like a numbered list, but actually what you're saying is that there's all sorts of other things, other techniques that you use. So what you said about sound is really interesting. What do you do there? Is it with clicks and taps and, how do you bring sound into the process?
I think the point is we're in a risk-averse environment. We're in a heavily regulated space. We have to have an instruction leaflet in the box with the product by law. Some countries are going fully digital, so that instruction leaflet will be linked through a QR code, so there won't be actual paper in the box with the product, but we have to have an instruction leaflet in there. The less that we can rely on those instructions, because we all know, how many times have you picked up a prescription from a pharmacy and there's that big, ordnance survey size map that you're unfolding, and it's got all of the, all of the ingredients of the drug that's in there, and, who's the manufacturer and all the history of the product, side effects, adverse reactions. And then there's a tiny little section usually of how do you take it. That has to be in there by law. We can't get around that. But what we can do by designing the device itself to be as intuitive as possible, it helps the patient. And I think it's probably good for your listeners to understand that here we're kind of talking about drug delivery devices that are put into the hands of patients. So instead of going to the clinic or to your GP surgery, you're now being handed a device to self-inject at home, which is quite a big burden for a patient. When you buy something from Amazon or Google systems, they're Xbox, they're all boxed beautifully, iPhone, that they guide you through the process step by step as you're unboxing that product. And we need to learn from that in healthcare. We need to use every space that we can to guide the patient through. So whether that's a label on the device itself that's saying, this end down, or an arrow on the cap that says you need to twist it this way or pull it down. The more that we can do without relying on somebody unfolding that huge bit of
That's
paper.
my exact experience as well. You mentioned auto-injectors, and there's some medication that I'm on that I need to inject once a week. And it's exactly like you described, because in the hospital, as they were talking, and I'm someone who, if I ask the directions in the street, I stop listening after the second one. And so by the time she handed me this enormous sharp spin, a spill kit in case I spilt it on myself, so then I was thinking, what, is it that toxic, this stuff that I'm putting into my body? If I spill it on myself, it's going to be really dangerous. So then I basically stopped listening after that. So then a few days later, I was in the bathroom on my own, getting out this thing that I had to inject into myself. And exactly like you say about an ordnance survey map size of it, of instructions, trying to go through all the bits about the contraindications and toxic side effects and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Just trying to find this one little bit of the instructions. And the thing that's interesting is that what I was also looking for was reassurance that I'd done it right. So when I did it for the first time, I could tell by the sound, it had a click sound. That meant it was complete. And then I could actually see on the window, okay, it seems to be empty now. So it's what you say, it's not just the instructions on a piece of paper, it's also all those other elements around.
Yeah.
And so how do you build reassurance into the process?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, again, by law, the devices have to have some way of communicating to the user that the device is finished. So like you said, the window filling up with a coloured plunger rod, a click at the end, or some devices have a click at the start, a click at the end, some continuously click to communicate to the patient. However, Lucy and I can tell you lots of shocking user study stories, but you put an instructions for use in front of somebody and you ask them to use a device, and like you said, you stop listening after the first two instructions. Some people skim read, so you have to be very careful about how you message. User cues are very helpful, but if they're not messaged in the right way, you can misinterpret that. Because put yourself back in that bathroom for the first time. How did you feel?
Quite emotional, actually, feeling and quite hesitant. And even I've been on this stuff for the last 8 months or something. Each time I go to do it, I'm a bit hesitant.
Yeah.
I still feel a bit scared about the whole process,
Yes.
and that I'm doing something wrong. And actually, can we expand on that a little bit as well? And how do you put yourself in a user's shoes? So let's say, for example, there's couples going through IVF treatment. There might be instructions they have to follow about medication. There's young women using a tampon for the first time. There's people that have to take stool samples. All these things in life that make us feel a bit kind of awkward, embarrassed, nervous. Parents whose child might be having an anaphylactic shock and very, very panicky situation. So how do you put yourself in the shoes of the end user?
You can never entirely empathise with people. You have to always be open-minded and learn more. It's a never-ending learning process. So really it's about watching people trying to use things that has, I think, built my empathy over the years.
Yeah, there's always something that's going to surprise you.
You can never truly understand. And it can be things like, it reminded me of something else I've used. It reminds me of my dog lead. And therefore I thought the button would do this.
Right.
And you're like, oh, I never would have thought that this thing looks like somebody's dog lead. And so and how many people have dogs? There's, I don't know, and dog leads of this kind, 10% of the population are going to make that mistake because it looks similar. Okay, we need to design it in a way that it respects that prior knowledge of the potential people who might respect, or it takes into account that knowledge and that mental model or that way of thinking when it comes to designing the product. Once we get into the stage of having prototypes or of a product where we can take those prototypes into a kind of staged, we call it a simulated use, where we get people to have a go, because we can't entirely empathise. So by having the intended users, the people who might be actually using this product eventually when it comes on the market, coming to visit us, or we go and visit them, and getting them to go through the motions and imagine they're using this product, we see or understand, or we can see how they behave and see what they're thinking or hear what they're thinking and extract that information from them to ever increase our level of empathy of what it might be like for a first-time user of this product.
That brings to mind someone I know, a communications agency that did lots of information during COVID, and some of the work they were doing was in India, and they visited India. So instead of just staying in Norfolk, wherever they were, and just kind of imagining how it might be, and then they realised that there's lots of cows around the place. So in some of the information they were putting out on posters for social distancing, instead of saying it in terms of metres, they were saying 2 cows distance from each other. And it's about thinking about the environment that people are in, isn't it? And really putting yourself in their shoes. Have people ever done anything that surprised you? So you've developed something like an EpiPen. The point that people are using this is very critical, and people have done something with it that you wouldn't expect.
One of the things that we do here a lot is make sure that our engineers who are designing the products are either, observing a user study or watching the sort of video recording of it afterwards, or at least reading the user study report, because engineers are great at designing things. However, they'll put a button here because that's where it fits in the CAD design the best, and that's how the spring works. But then the user can't use it, or it's not intuitive, or they can't get the cap off, or people don't even bother to read the instructions and go, I know what I'm doing, and then use the device use the device upside down and inject into their thumb, or like I say, pull the device off too soon because they've heard a click and now the drug is going everywhere. We do witness a lot of things, and it makes us better designers, right? Because you see the mistakes. You think you've designed it in such a way that, nobody can possibly use this incorrectly, and there's always somebody that uses it incorrectly. That's why I said we're all about reducing that risk. When we're designing a product, we have a very long risk analysis and look at all the hazards that could happen, and we need to be designing out those risks as much as possible. You'll never design them all out, but you need to test the instructions are actually fit for purpose.
The instructions we've been talking about so far have all been functional. There to tell you how to swallow, insert or inject the thing. But when it comes to something like Lego, the instructions are part of the play itself. So if you're someone who spent Christmas Day building a giant Lego Millennium Falcon or a 6,000-piece replica of Hogwarts, you'll know how much the instructions help you enjoy the process itself. And it's quite tricky because they have to consider different abilities, parents and children, but they cleverly guide you through step by step, challenging you just enough so you get a sense of satisfaction at each stage and not so frustrated that you give up. Founded in Denmark in 1932, Lego is an abbreviation of 2 Danish words which I'm not going to attempt to pronounce right now, but put together they mean play well. They brought in instructions in 1963. Initially hand-drawn, the staff would take pictures of the Lego models and draw around the outlines, and this would show visually how to complete each stage. Obviously, they moved to less labour-intensive methods of creating the instructions, but the visual style remained, along with lots of elements designed to give you confidence that you're on the right track. Like the picture on the front of the box showing the finished piece against an exciting backdrop of space or a busy city or a jungle. You know what you're building then, and it encourages imagination, storytelling and play. There's large, clear images that are numbered, 1 instruction per page, so they have room to breathe and you don't get lost. And there's very limited text, so the pictures do all the talking. I don't know if you've ever met a 5-year-old, but you'll know that they lose patience very quickly, and they need to lead the play, not have their parent take over. The Lego website itself has thousands of instructions in a searchable database going back decades, so if you're feeling nostalgic, go and have a rummage. Now let's go back to the medical world, and if you're the parent of that impatient 5-year-old, you may have had a moment some years earlier where you took a pregnancy test. And for many people, this is a real sliding doors moment. Whether it's positive or negative, the result is hugely significant. How do we give people confidence that it's actually correct?
Yeah, there's a really nice example of that for a pregnancy test. So with the COVID test, you wait for lines to appear or not to appear, and then you open up the instructions, and you look at the instructions, and you try and work out what the lines mean. 1 line here, 1 line there, 2 lines, which one means positive? There's a really nice pregnancy test that took that step away. So you didn't need to check back with the instructions to know if the test was positive or negative, because the way that they designed the test, the 2 lines made a positive sign,
like
2 crossed lines, a plus sign,
Right.
if it was positive, or a negative sign if it was negative. So it actually took away that step of needing to refer back to the instructions that you have with COVID tests. So that's a really nice example that unfortunately wasn't then applied to COVID tests during COVID, but it's a really nice example from pregnancy tests that takes that, builds the instructions into the products itself in an intuitive way that means you don't need to read anything.
Because one thing that you seem to be saying as well is that you should have a product so intuitive that you shouldn't need instructions.
That's the ideal. However, the reality is as technology gets more and more complicated, there's always going to be the need to educate people about new ways of interacting with a product. Even surgeons, for example, when there's been a move towards robotic surgery away from, manual use of surgical instruments, and instructions don't really cut it for a surgical robot, although they do have to be there. What's been used instead in that situation has been like a simulation before they go and try it out on a real patient, so that they can build their confidence and build their knowledge of how the instruments behave, how they control the instruments. And what that done is it's taken the place of what would have been almost impossible instructions to write and replaced it with a simulation that builds the surgeon's tacit knowledge and builds their understanding and dexterity via a computer, essentially.
So you're kind of instructing by doing, by giving people a chance to try it out.
Yeah, that's another way of reducing reliance on instructions, is by giving people a way to experience something instead. And that also happens with injection devices as well.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, most patients, well, all patients should essentially be trained before they go home to inject for the first time. However, when you talk to a lot of patients that are doing these injections, they didn't receive training, or they received training on the wrong device. So training is important. However, we can't, as developers, we can't rely that patients will be trained on how to use these devices. And as you really eloquently said, you were
anyway.
trained, but you're not listening anyway, because you're in a heightened state of emotion, and it's quite overwhelming. And so we have seen some trends towards, it starts with YouTube videos, so some of the nurses you talk to have got favoured YouTube videos that they tell their patients about. Some of those YouTube videos are like, this is how not to do it.
Right. Yes.
So watch this one for this is how not to do it, and watch this one for this is how to do it. And then, some pharmaceutical companies are taking that into their own hands. They have videos on their websites that talk you through step by step. And then on from that is having it on your mobile phone. We've all got our phones next to us all the time. A QR code on the box will link you to a video. There's even some people looking into augmented reality, and like Lucy was saying with the surgeons, headsets and things like that for the very complex devices that patients are being expected to use. So there's a number of ways to do it. It's all about reducing the risk and reassuring the patient that they are doing it correctly, or the parent or the caregiver. And as we all age, things like Parkinson's disease, a lot of that is now treated at home with relatively complex to use infusion pumps. So we need to be very mindful of that emotional state that patients and caregivers are in, and empathise with that and move away from very complicated instructions for use. We've all seen instructions for use that are 50 pages long, and you would need a PhD in infusion pump technology to use. And that's because they were originally designed for a hospital setting and then were sent home with patients. What we're now seeing is companies are now very mindful of the fact that you can't just send a device that was for a trained nurse home with a patient. We are now designing devices that are patient-friendly home use devices.
And that whole element of telling people when they've got it right, I think, is very important. Completely separate to medical devices, I've been writing a script lately for an audio tour. So it takes people through the streets of Cambridge, and one thing I've been very careful to do is tell people when they're in the right place. So if it looks like this, you're in the right place. If it looks like this, you've gone too far. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because a part of telling people what to do is in the instruction is also about reassuring them and saying, yeah, this is right. It's now complete. The process is over. You can now dispose of your medical device, or you've done it well. So I suppose, what's one thing that you would say is really critical? So in making the instructions easy to understand, and let's say we're thinking about children or people who may not have English as their first language, what's one thing that you try and weave into instructions, whatever technology, whatever the format, that makes them really easy to understand?
Yeah, I would actually say your comment about signposting people is something that is built into instructions, when built into instructions well, is absolutely brilliant. The way that signposting is built into classic paper-based instructions or visual instructions is via some kind of graphic. So if we look at an example where, say, you've got two things that fit together and they have to be oriented in a certain way to fit them together, but the design isn't really clear. People don't know, looking at it, which way around it goes to fit these two parts together. Being able to communicate that without words is absolutely brilliant. A picture does speak 1,000 words, and that can be done with a very simple graphic showing the right way to connect the two parts and what it looks like when you've got it right, and then some pictures of what not to do. This is what not to do. This is when you know you're in the wrong place. You've hit the dead end. So yeah, it's signposting in a way that uses as few words as possible.
And how about you, Claire? Is there anything that you particularly advise all the way through the process that's going to help people really understand what the instructions are intended to do?
For us in the drug delivery sector, who's using the device? If it's the patient using the device, then for goodness sake, have the picture showing a patient using the device and not somebody else putting the device on somebody else. Or if it is a device that you're expecting a parent to use on a child, then show them how to use it. So that graphic has got to be contextual to the user. And if it's both, if it's an EpiPen that you might have to use on yourself, then have both. Because in that moment, that can cause confusion. So it's about, again, reducing the risk of incorrect and unsafe use. That's what we're trying to do at every step of the way, and test again, because people do surprising things. And that, it could be something as simple as, really being very, very clear about there are 2 clicks, or there are clicks all the way through, or whatever that is. It's, what happens when you get to the end, so that patient is getting that full dose. That's what we're in the business of, is getting that full dose into that patient in as risk-free a way as possible. And that's what the instructions are there for.
One of my favourite bits of copywriting ever is from Apple when the iPad first came out. Their tagline was, "You already know how to use it." I always thought this was brilliant because it was so true. Even if you'd never seen an iPad before, you could still pick it up and use it straight away. And this underlines a point made by Lucy and Claire. When it comes to medical products, you shouldn't need a newspaper-sized set of instructions to understand how they work. It should all be intuitive, which is really important. So let's say someone in front of you is having a heart attack. There's no time to read a 50-page instruction booklet, install an app that needs a QR code, login details, and a 16-character password. You need to just grab a defibrillator and get it to work. So whether you're on product development yourself or simply giving instructions, let's say how to get to your office, then it's good to think, number 1, how can you declutter the process? What can you take out that's actually causing a distraction? Secondly, how can you break it down step by step, maybe using sound or visual clues to get the message across and not just a written word? And lastly, have you actually tested it on real people, young and old, different abilities, so you can see it from their perspective and improve the instructions as a result? Thank you so much to Lucy Sheldon and Claire Beddoes from Cambridge Design Partnership for helping me untangle instructions, and to Rob Burney from Made by DBM for editing, production and putting everything in a sensible order. Do like and subscribe. Just head to my website to find out how and to read the show notes for this episode. That's sookio.com/podcast, sookio.com/podcast.